do it interactively from the start and the beginning. But I'll also include your comments in it, in this way. My name is Lech Suwala. I'm a professor for urban and regional economics at TU Berlin. And we have a very interdisciplinary group back at TU, almost infamous. As you know, Jeanette is part of it. Dimitris is part of it. So we have a bunch of architects, sociologists, geographers, economists, and urban regional planners, because that's where we're situated in. And I think what this makes the group so diverse and interesting. So that the next question is, okay, why should I present here in front of you? I'm not a core CVS guy. I did some other stuff. I came from cultural creative industries. That's how I met with Jeanette, for example. So I took another way. Colleagues that followed or are probably from this part. There's, for example, also Sunti Schmidt, who is in the back. So I did some co-working stuff 8 years ago, where she was pushing this in one of the first studies in Berlin for the Zenit in 2012 with, I think, Verena Brinks and Sascha Brinkhoff. They made a pioneering study about this different types of arrangements. But I think that family businesses, and I added hidden champions here also, might make you think about possible connections, why this institution of collaborative or co-working spaces might be a new broker in this regional ecosystems arrangements so far. Right? So that's why we want to try to link those two things. How the institution of the family might help to understand if, for example, collaborative working spaces are a new substitute for a family in, especially for your interesting rural peripheral areas. Okay, so these are some of those things that we will tackle. Apart from that, I will also talk in general about family business, hidden champions, and why they might be interesting for you as a role models, or probably a different type of organizations to deal with in order to get this brokerage function going on. Okay, first of all, a short overview, a lineup of what's going to happen. First of all, I give you some stylized facts about family businesses in general, so you have an understanding what it's all about and how really is the impact of those specific organization form. And this is the oldest and by far the most widespread organization from all over the world. So it's a big impact of almost every economy, but the question is how to exploit the potential of it also for arrangements like CVS. Then I give some definitions, and these definitions will be definitions from a spatial point of view, obviously, because in family business studies and among all other people in management science and so on and so forth, they've been dealing with this stuff for 120 years. But in the last 10 years or so, there is a short convergence between those two types of studies, and we like to really point out the special points. And those special views, special points might be also interesting for you. For the management of those CVS, when you look at family business or hidden champions on other things. So I would like to draw some parallels in here. Then there will be an interlude of a little bit of a personal story, how I came there, and how it developed in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And then we come to some approaches where we try to link those family business ideas to CVS. This is the part B here. And then a final consideration. And I have more questions than answers for you, but I think I have a lot of food for thought for you in order to try to connect these ideas together. And in between we will have then your feedbacks. I'm interested for that. And then we have an open discussion. So I hopefully try to be ready in an hour with the main state until we get there. Perfect. First of all, I've already said a little bit about how we might link those issues, but do you have any ideas why family businesses, hidden champions, whatever this is, I'll talk about it in a second, might be interesting for you studying co-working, collaborative working spaces? Anyone with ideas? Yes. Yeah.
Related to local community or region?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So you have the family institution somehow embedded, integrated, rooted, as our colleague was telling yesterday. What else can you think of? Please.
They might have spatial resources available that they want to share or that they want to offer.
Exactly. It's somehow a bundle of specific resources that they deal with. Yeah, that might be interesting also for CBS. What else? Please.
Yeah, for example, I interviewed one of the spaces and what they said was very interesting because my project is about location factors, why you are choosing. I asked them why you chose this location, and they simply told me that because it was my grandmother's, so we wanted to make money out of it, so we turned it to something very modern. So co-working after COVID has been very popular in Europe, so that's why.
Yeah, interesting. Probably a different life cycle model. Yeah, turning old patchwork families to patchwork families, co-working spaces. Is this something that we want to follow? I don't know, but might be interesting to think of. Anything else?
Because of the great majority of businesses in
Yes,
this location.
exactly. Think about if you have a problem with succession, who's going to be the next one? Because people, if you think about places like even this here, the next generation, if you need to take over, you more or less would have to stay in silos, for example, in order to run the whole company. Many of the next generation don't want to do it, So people trying to search for new people to run the company outside of the family, This is a patchwork type office, or probably concentrated in a collaborative way, or whatever. Okay. So you see, there are some links, some bridges that we can build, which might be, the whole thing might be interesting for you. Okay. Before we get there, some stylized facts about, and some numbers, since I'm an economist, I don't have to tell you about this. Okay. Here you see some of family businesses, probably some companies that you think family businesses, some are more obvious than others, but also to give you a little bit of the magnitude of the idea. So, Lidl. Lidl is 150 meters if you go that street. There's a subsidiary of Lidl. Lidl is owned by family, Schwarz Group. It's in southwestern Germany, Baden-Württemberg. And you see it had, in 2020, 500,000 employees. And it has a revenue of 125 billion euro. And if you like to compare it a little bit, the biggest company worldwide that we will talk about, also family businesses, is Walmart. It's at 450 billion, roughly. The GDP, the regional GDP of Attica, the main region around Athens in Greece, has 80 to 90 billion. In order to give you a number how big those companies might be. Yeah. This is the last numbers that I get. And you see Bosch, and others. When I looked at Greece examples, there is the second biggest company in Greece is a motor oil company, where Coral, by the way, is a subsidiary of them. They are, I think, number 8 or something like this, so also it's a funny accident in here. And, they have control by this Vadijonas family that I'm sure that people of you here from Greece are familiar with. And there are obviously all other great people in Greece who push this family business evolution. And this guy here up there, this Onassis, right? So it's very interesting because in the 1950s, 1960s, where most industries all over Europe were nationalized, he had a very specific way in order to get things running. So about his ship fleet, then about Olympic Airways, and all other businesses, whale catching and all that stuff, which from nowadays perspective was, of course, a little bit difficult. I don't know how disputed he is in Greece, but yeah.
Especially with these companies of this size,
Yes.
family owned is when the family close links.
I will talk about it in a second. Yes, this is just an overview. Yeah, that's a very good question. What does a family business means? How do we define it, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so this is just a first snapshot for you in order to have an idea what's going. If we try to put it or map it worldwide, you can see that roughly 60 to 90% of all non-governmental GDP is made by family businesses. You see, roughly it comprises up to 95% of all registered companies. So it's like a big chunk, and this is your good question, where do we start or where do we end? What does it mean? Employee-owned, family owned, family managed, and so on and so forth. So what it's all about, where do we draw the the red line? Okay, so this is the next question. But you see, it's out there and you have some numbers. And I'm just taking the former triad of North America, Europe, and Asia here, for example, into account. And you see that these numbers are striking. If we look, for example, in North America, 80 to 90% of all companies. When it comes to GDP and the workforce, the numbers are a little bit lower because we have those big stock IPO companies which diminished the whole percentage. But in general, it's a big issue. Okay. The next thing I'm going to present to you is an own database that we just trying to set up at the moment with colleagues in Mannheim. So we have a population here of 30.5 million companies that we try to match in 138 countries. And what is striking is the first one that there's a big lack in Africa because for this query we said we need 50 observations per country. Otherwise, we don't take it into account. And we have specific numbers of revenue, assets, and employees that we want to employ. Because if we would put this on every family business, there would be a blue map, okay, all over the place. So in order to give you the mid-size family business a little bit, you see, with few exceptions, it's a dominating form all over the place. The few exceptions, you can put it in two groups of countries. Group number one are the former Soviet Republic, CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Belarus, and others, where you have still a strong centrally driven government where family ventures are pushed to the side, despite they're probably informally there still. The second group, where the relation, when it comes only to the sheer number, I'm not talking a revenue or employees, this is a different issue that we didn't came that far so far, because it's in the end, the idea would be to set up an atlas of family business geographies or something like this, but it's very interesting. Are the so-called states which has a intermediate function between supranational economic regions. For example, probably or it is a tax haven, or it has some kind of trade position. Interestingly, a very low number when it comes to the sheer size of companies, family versus non-family, is Panama. And you can think about why is this the case, because this is so what we call Briefkastenfirma. What is the English? Do you know?
Tax haven.
Yeah. So you have those small companies that basically exist because of this. Yeah. Okay. Another thing is Belgium, also below 50%. Why is that? Because there are a lot of representatives, subsidiaries of companies in Belgium, because there is the government. Interestingly, for example, in Croatia, you have also something like this, because all the people in the Balkans, this is the bridge to the EU while making business and so on. So there are some of those things as well. But in general, you see, it's a pretty strong dominance of those firms, and even if we move them to a mid-size part of it. Okay.
Quick question, when
Sure.
you were talking about tax havens, were you referring to shell companies?
I would say that, you heard about the Panama Papers incident, and you can look a bit. I think the Cayman Islands are similar, south of Jamaica, which makes up. So, and we can go down to some specifics. So, for example, Isle of Man or the Channel Islands, Jersey and Guernsey and things like this. You find also a big proportion of those companies. Of course, the database is limited to those companies which are report also. Of course, so it's not a thing that.
We call them in German post.
Yeah.
That's why he's making the time. They just have an address there, but nothing else.
Yes, exactly.
That's shell companies, the English companies.
Shell company.
Yeah, no physical.
And also London is a big one.
Absolutely. If we would go to the that's the next step. Absolutely. If you would go down to the national or the regional level, this will also turn out that we'll see. Okay, so if you probably mash these things with a world city network, financial cities, you get the same or an interesting picture where you see, okay, that suddenly in states, in cities, the share of family businesses drops down, and this is why it becomes interesting for the peripheral view that we'll talk about later. So that's exactly the right thoughts here. Perfect. As I told you, family, the biggest company worldwide when it comes to revenues, employees, the Walton family-controlled Walmart. You see, it was not successful in all countries. It was in Germany, for example. They didn't make it. Was driven out. Yeah. And if we put up together the 500 biggest family, or even the 750 biggest families worldwide, you end up with numbers. For example, for the 500, it's 7.2 trillion, which is roughly double the size of the GDP of Germany. Or if you're 750, you came up with 10 trillion, which is half the size of the US company. So, only those 750, so it's a big stake. So family does not necessarily mean small, micro, even if the majority of those companies like this, but also big conglomerates that are controlled by the family. We got to this definition soon. What is also interesting for UKs in particular is the following fact. It's about the long lifespans. And that's why a lot of those firms are in places which are rural now, which were probably industrial centers back in this, but they are rural now. And it is the backbone of a lot of regions in Europe in particular. And there are various cultural, historic, infrastructural, administrative, and so on reasons why it lasted in regions longer than others. But this is the interesting thing that, if we only take the top 500 family business in Germany, and then we make a median or an average, how old they are, it's 101 years old. Now we have a very interesting definitional point here, that this locally rootedness is also taken from the fact that these families or these businesses are so long in business, so they reach out for those resources. They are so spatially deeply rooted. And as we know, space as a driver for heterogeneity, this makes one interesting thing that you might also think about it, how to root those CVS in those peripheral spaces. Because I think there might be the new agents that might substitute family functions, probably, I don't know. So this is another thing. Interestingly, the geography is highly skewed. If you look only at the top 500, and you look at the German federal states, you see, and I don't want to give you the numbers in general, that if we take Thuringia, Saxonia-Anhalt, Brandenburg, and Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, the 4 new Bundesländer, we end up with 18 companies out of 500, which equals roughly 3.4%. So in former socialist state, that's why Germany is an interesting take to look at, because a country where we have both systems until the 1990s, that it takes its time until it's cultivated. So those locally family business, it come out not from nothing. If you look at the shares in the Bundesländer of the East, it's higher even than the West when it comes to the sheer company size. But in the big segment of the biggest ones, it's highly skewed. If you take away Berlin, the 9, you end up with 1.6% only. So this is also something that is really striking here. An additional thing which might, let's say, give you another fact why family firms are so interesting and so important is the fact that the cooperative forms, legal forms of family firms are unlimited. Most companies are limited who are on the stock market. So they are limited, if there's something going wrong, they limit their deposits on paying it with there are certain rules to it. Family firms are unlimited. That means there's an intrinsic motivations of those people that you talked with to run the company beyond economic goals. It's not a shareholder, but a stakeholder approach to all of it. You care for your employees. You have all transgenerational commitment to people, to families that work for you. I'm pretty sure that happened here also, for example, that space, which was a family company, as I learned from the lady. Yeah. So it's a different. Anyway, this might be interesting for you, and another sign of this spatial and stickiness, the roots, how it evolves. But it needs time, it needs a generation. Okay. So this is, and you see some numbers here. So on the left-hand side, you see the companies who are unlimited, and most of them are family. So the orange ones is family-based, and the rather red ones is the stock market companies. So if you move to the unlimited companies, you see that the limited companies, you see that the stock market, not family business, is getting a momentum here. Okay, now let's move to hidden champions, because hidden champions is a specific segment. Zulfie, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The top 500 companies
Yes.
that you showed us,
Yeah.
is it limited or unlimited mostly?
The one before, it doesn't matter. There's no distinction between the legal form. Yeah.
But wouldn't that be interesting?
Absolutely.
To understand the share of external
Yes.
money coming in.
Absolutely, yes. I think there are statistics with regard to this, but probably for our purposes here, it's not the striking point. Absolutely, good point. Thank you.
Can you explain why you consider that a limited company has a stronger? I mean, I
Yeah.
consider that family business owned have a stronger impact and more attention to the
Yes.
But why a limited company would have a greater incentive to treat better their
Yes.
families, their workers,
Absolutely.
etc., because
That's a
the
suggestion.
is there.
Yeah, there's a suggestion and proposition for mine that I think it's a hypothesis. It's not tested yet, but from an intuitive point of view, I would say, and that's what I experienced in the interviews that I did in the last 10, 15 years with company owners, family-based, always that, I mean, this is what they care for. It's very interesting because, and I'll show you an approach later, how I approach the family business and what I can get from them. Because they are mostly people who run, female or male, doesn't matter, the company generational-wise. So you don't have a manager, shareholder-wise, that changes every 5 years, but you get all the story for the last 40 years. So there's a commitment. And through all those things, I expect that those people care more for it. It might not necessarily be the case. And also, as Junti pointed out, in the big family segment, there are, even the motor oil thing is 45% owned by this family, but the 60 or 55% are owned by other people who also have the right shares to talk about and right to influence the politics of the company and so on. But this is a suggestion that I think there are certain ideas and points that make family businesses special. I'm not also saying that family business is something good to have. You have very brutal leaders of family firms that, throughout the history did good business on exploiting people on a big time. Yeah, definitely. I'm not rejecting this. Anyway, okay. An interesting point here, which also has a geography behind it, is the family or the hidden champion idea. The hidden champion, as far as I understand it, after scanning all the literature, is there's a German professor, Hermann Simon, and he's working in this field for the last 30 years, and he came up with this idea of hidden champions. However, the companies that are put it into this section are also researched upon in the 60s, 70s, 80s in Canada, in Japan, and before. But some people also talk about threshold families. Others say international market leaders. So there are different names to what I mean by small, often family firm-driven companies in this middle segment that have almost not research upon it, at least in my profession or my discipline. Either you go for entrepreneurship, small and medium enterprises, small enterprises, or you go for the multinational enterprise. And there's this in between the middle firm segment, which few studies in general that deal with it. But it's interesting because the hidden champions are now taking up on those characteristics of family business and link this local rootedness to international excellence. Okay, so they are niche leaders, top 3 on the continent or worldwide. So they are juggling a little bit between the local and the international resources. This is what they do. And you see the employees, the revenues that we are trying to roughly come up with here. The interesting part is they highly innovate. Highly innovate means that they're spending more than 6% of their revenue on innovation activities. And the benchmark, high benchmark, is 3.5 in an industry. A second thing which is also interesting is the high production debt. Normally the high production debt is now 20 to 25 overall industries. In the industries we are really highly vertically integrated, you have 50%. A lot of hidden champions come up with 70%. So they are independent of any deliveries from outside, which might be a haven, or they source locally often. Also interesting probably for CVs and interpretation of it. And they are hidden because they are deal with B2 business-to-business activities, so it's not seen to the market, unlike, for example, unicorns or gazelles, who are very strong, very fast, or consumer-oriented platforming stuff type. Okay.
And then you mentioned innovation, like because I don't know if you're gonna cover this later on.
Yeah.
But that was, one of the questions that we had is, like for instance, when I was doing my MBA, and we were reviewing a lot of case studies on, obviously different type of businesses, and some of the conclusions drawn were that at the not big conglomerates or huge company family businesses, like smaller family business type, they normally fail because they fail to innovate because there's this attachment, to their idea, original idea. So
a very good point. Yes, this is always what family firms are. The tension that they have to fulfill. On the one hand, they might be the safe haven. Depends on also the lifestyle of the family. If you have a new generation coming up, they're coming up with these new ideas. But in general, there is this prejudice or rumor that these are not able really to innovate because they are stuck in persistence, lock-in effects on a regional basis, and so on. And it has been shown to a lot of regions, Westmünsterland, in the Ruhrgebiet area, by various authors, how family firm-driven concentration in regions have led to the fact that those regions demised and they fall apart or really. So this is an interior or a persistence effect which is not good. Yeah. So this is always the case. Okay. Now the interesting fact, and this is in red here, that these companies are to be found in rural areas, and this is a link to you. And I borrowed the graphics from my colleagues here in Leipzig, from Thilo and Lukas and Franziska worked also in part. So they set up a map how those hidden champions, and there are various databases. One is from Simon, another is from Beat Venor, a third is from a colleague of mine, Jörn Block from Trier, and they map those things here. And you see, the more white the area is, the more urban, more peri-urban it is, and the more gray it gets, the more peripheral or very peripheral it gets. And what they get out of it, first of all, that we have certain concentration of those hidden champions in states where economic, let's say, dynasties and political stability was better than in others. And they didn't have a system transformation, in particular in the south of Baden-Württemberg, in Hesse, in North Rhine-Westphalia, and Bavaria. If you would extend this map to Austria and Switzerland, you see the same concentrations in regions that are close to those in the south, interestingly. And what is also interesting is that almost every third of those hidden champions, it's headquartered in a small town in Germany. Additionally, if you add up small towns in the periphery, you come up that 1 out of 5 hidden champions is located outside of densely populated areas in Germany. Now, if you think about, okay, what can we learn from this? Why these are so successful in the periphery? And this could be a role model also for understanding how probably CVS in the periphery might also work out like this. I don't know, just an idea to think about. Okay, now let's come to our point where we try to sum up some of those stylized facts in a whatever type of definition, right? Family business scholars and all those people that dealt with ideas that, especially the middle firm segment, Mittelstand, family business, owner managed, family managed companies, what about the shares, and you can jingle back and forth. In the end, it's about the division of ownership and management rights. That says if a family firm is considered as a family firm or not. There's a figure here that gives you it's in German, but I can roughly tell you about it. The left part is you have ownership and management in the hands of the family. So this is really considered family. And the more you move to the right side, this falls apart until it's really not an independent company, but it's dependent on outside sources. You know? So this is our first approximation of what a family business is. So we can say, and this is really a definition that gets most of it, family business is a business where the ownership and family rights are united in the person of our entrepreneur, the family, and so on. Majority or minority is another issue, but this is more or less the definition. If you would go down to the micro enterprises, it's basically every company's family business. Now, interestingly, those companies' family businesses have, besides those local roots that I showed you, some other characteristics which might be also interesting for you as CVS scholars, which I will talk about when I give you a spatial definition of family business. So the upper part is mainly what we know so far. So it's dynamic. Now a social entity, not only a commercial, but also a social entity. That might make things interesting already. Controlled, governed, or managed by families. So this is what we talked about already. It's a transgenerational commitment. So that's about the long lifespanning. What else do we have here? Geographically unevenly, depends on the size of those family firms that we learned, but deeply spatially rooted. And now the spatially rooting, I'm trying to diversify or differentiate in 3 building blocks. And it has something to do with understandings of space here also. So the operational economic side is locational dependent. So they have to do the cost benefit ratios analysis on a locational basis, all what we know from economic models of space, how firms, where they locate and why they locate. So this is a relative understanding of space here. Location, space and as economic space location. You calculate it in transport costs, in distance, in time, whatever, but you can exactly know where to place those. Second thing that is interesting here, that these family firms are bound with internal and external networks. Internal networks of employees, and there are different proximities. You move to the relational understanding of spaces, how to deal with it, socially, organizationally, cognitively, and so on. Same applies to supplier and customer networks, so outside of the firm. So this is a human HR, spatial management type of completely different understanding, relationally, socially constructed spaces, and so on. Plus, the third thing that is also very interesting for family business is a meaning of space not as an economic space or a social space as a place, but as a culturally image-driven space. I name it landscape. House of the family, image, atmosphere, setup of workplace, and other things, you know. Again, a different understanding of space. Space is something probably appropriated, imagined, but not socially necessarily constructed, but as an atmosphere type of, okay? So this is what I come up with. Why can I capture this spatially deeply rooting of those families through different understanding of space, how this is attached to it. Just an understanding. We move this to hidden champions. The upper part we already talked about, innovative, high production depth, export-oriented, and so on. And now the interesting part is that they have the local embeddings like the family firms, plus the international excellence or international networks. And then there are some concepts in economic geography about local bus, global pipelines, for example, global pipelines, and so on, where you can think about strategies how these companies, and now think about your collaborative workspaces, if there are networks international among them, how this can probably work. Okay. Now try to digest this. And now we move to a second part where I tell you a little bit about the story, how I get there as a geographer, economic geographer mainly, despite I'm a guy that I did both geography and economics I have 2 masters in this respect. That was me in 2012 to 16. After finishing my PhD, I was looking like a wanderer above the sea of fog, and okay, how can I approach family business? So I went there, and it was not easy to find somebody because I was mainly in my field. Then one of those listservs that I used, international business listserv, and I think I don't have the original first mail of this guy named Rodrigo Bastro. He immediately answered a call, and he was like, okay, I'm a family business guy, I'm looking for somebody who deals with regional issues. And he had already one special issue out there in one of those journals, and that's how we stick together. So roughly 5 years ago, until then, or from then, you see the whole idea grew a little bit, and we could have some conference sessions. There's an edited book last year that came out about this thing, and there's an interesting mixture of geographers, management scholars, economists, and so on. And the whole thing is developing. So we try to build a bridge between a spatially informed family business / hidden champions idea here. And interestingly, if we talk about this bridge, some of big scholars in both fields, so I went to this family business conference in management, EURAM, 3 times. What? Probably we're going to meet in Dublin next year. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yes. So they have this special. This is a very interesting part here. Anyway, also great scholars in both fields reminded of why the family is so important, and even really hardcore regional economists like Walter Isar said. This is the lower quotation. Families are basic social organization that we need to understand, otherwise we do not understand capitalism at all. At the same side, Josef Astrakhan, which is a big figure in family business studies, he said, if the family is not really embedded in its environment, cultural odds with it, it won't work, no business will work, okay? In other words, it tells us family embeddings through spatially rooted ideas is basically the building points that we deal with. Okay, I was telling you already about the fact why probably family firms or the middle firm segment might be interesting, because in my field, in economic geography, they really dealt with entrepreneurship, startup, small enterprises. Also in the global south, as you see, the classical things, cultural enterprises, all like M&Es. That's why it might be interesting. Now, as you probably know, some 50 years ago, there was a resurgence of so-called small and medium enterprises, and in economic geography in particular, especially they found a new solution of our organizational type that has been forgotten for 80 years after Marshallian companies. And this is it. Where is it? Can somebody, and we have some people from that country. Sorry?
Market.
Yes. Where are our Italian friends? Where is it?
Market.
Yeah? What is it called? Yeah, this is the so-called third Italy phenomenon. First Italy in the north, second in the south, and in between there were these small and medium enterprises, that they were trying to do businesses in specialized industrial sectors, shoe manufacturing, towels, and so on and so forth. So after those M&Es and this whole first wave of big company capitals came to an end or crashed down partly, there was this new remedy, and they realized, hey, the whole thing is not only periphery, small and medium enterprises, but it's also family. And this family part was forgotten in economic geography. That dealt with trust, with reciprocity, with how this whole thing managed the space in it, but not necessarily the family point of it. So we unearth it again. But if you say, okay, clusters of small family craft-based firms in rural areas of the third Italy. Now then the model was trying to be explored. So imagine this is the beginning of collaborative workspace, probably, and then you see, okay, this is an interesting model, and they tried to export it. Failed many times, and anyway. Also, and there was a person called the Impanatore Italian, who was basically trying to, so think about the co-working space manager here, who tried to, to put those things together, those small steps. Might be an idea. And this, let's say, historically community-driven ideas of clusters, industrial districts, milieus, whatever you might call it, new production spaces, were then to found outside of these places too. For example, Henry Young, a scholar in my field, was talking 20 years ago about the called Venzu model. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's a specific entrepreneurial spirit in a region that was successful back in the days, or still is. Or, for example, the Gnesiu spirit of Sweden. And there are some of these ideas that are out there. I thought it might be interesting if there is a spirit here in Syros as well. Because you have the shipyard, if you walk by 300 meters away from here, is an entrance gate to the Napoleon shipyards, 1861. So I made a small research trying to catch up what's going on. So the upper left picture is basically the shipyards here, very close. Established in 1861. And I realized that these people, they have manufactured cars here in the 70s. So they had a CEO, family run also, and then they bought this company called Enfield. And I don't know, Vasilis or Dimitris or any other from you. Are you familiar with this car? No. They have been 100 produced. And sorry?
The owner of this space told us that apart from the tour that they offered us, they also offered a tour with these cars.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow, we need to go. So I think first of all it looks like a golf cart car, but it was used for mine sweeping and things like this later on. They sold 100 of it, and of this car it was I don't know, it's called Neorion Chicago. Only 2 were sold, but it's an overall in the 70s. It crashed down. The question would be also here to think about, is there something like a zero spirit? I think after what I saw you yesterday drinking and partying, I think there is one. Now the question is to understand, right? Anyway, yes, so you see, there are some probably starting points with regard to this. Anyway, okay, let's skip this personal academic story and go to the second big part and try to summarize some literature review results about what can we learn from probably family firm, spatially driven accountants. This is an idea how we try to get this together, but this is probably not the interesting point for you. First of all, if we see what's in the literature about these family firms and the special rooted of it, and what can we probably learn from co-working spaces, collaborative spaces, is the very fact that if family firms at all have been established, they didn't do a structuralized location search process. Normally they picked locations close to their residencies. And this is, at least for bottom-up collaborative spaces, often also the case. So you are basically locally rooted because you know, oh, there's a friend of mine who has a edificio there or a room or whatever, and that's where I'm setting the whole thing up. And this is how our family business also mainly starts. And this is also evidenced by literature in many cases. Yeah? A lot of soft factors, if at all. Look at Berlin, Zalando, which is now, okay, of course, started as Friends type of, it was also somewhere. Yeah. What is also interesting here for the spatial routing is the case that persistence, it's often in the 80s, 90s, family firms imagine where it came from, the family farm. Yeah, when the primary sector has the highest stakes in the pre-industrial economies. So it was a rural issue right from the beginning, right? So often until the 80s, you find in the definitions of family business, family firms, still the fact this is a rural entity, mostly, right? Okay. What is also interesting when you look at the different scales is that there have been research on the local, global, and so on and so forth. Interestingly, what they always mention is the home bias or home region effect. That there's a strong rooting in where it all started, and this is where they get, let's say, the main impulses from. Interestingly. When we move beyond this rather descriptive locational looks at it and come to these relational, socially constructed entities here, we understand that it's a little bit about being embedded versus being independent. Okay, how do you deal with this? You know, there are new studies now already. It's nice to be embedded, but you have a lock-in. If your two persist is too strong, what we talked about already is how to deal with, and this is very, very interesting. The first one, the framework conditions. There are studies who said that the industrial district effect, for example, of Third Italy, of clusters and so on, is at odds with a family firm effect. That means you have an institutional layer of those small and medium enterprises of these institutions they have their own logic. Another logic is the family logic. And often these are contradicting with each other. Now the question would be also, is it interesting if the collaborative working space effect, if there is one where people intermingle? Is it at odds with the institution? And this is what a lot of you researched upon. If I see, for example, at Gauss, grounding of his PhD, because you want to put it into entrepreneurial ecosystems, and this is nothing like an institutional layer. Is it supporting it or not? Is it a different logic of understanding how the family or the collaborative working space thing works or not? Do they contradict or do they support each other? Very interesting point that you can elaborate upon where studies is now going. And so on and so forth. I will not go through all of it, but probably the policy planning part is also interesting. Often family firms were really independent also of policy measures because they want to do their own thing, that they are not really going on this promotionally programs and so on and so forth. At the same time, and this is something also interesting, is that there are a lot of supportive measures from those companies because they are so locally rooted in the idea of, and you know it, corporate social responsibility. And if you move beyond this and put it on a spatial framing, you might talk about corporate spatial responsibility or regional responsibility. And there are different intensities of it. Of course, some companies just stick to the rules, ESG or what, and do it as greenwashings and whatever. But there are measures, and there are some papers that we published in the last 5 years or so, where there's a different intensity of these responsibilities. It might start with a kindergarten or a small event in the community, but you can push it forward really to a revitalization of an entire small town, or they're even setting up the whole master plan for planning. Of course, could be a danger in it that those companies take over. You may look at rural mining towns in Botswana or Australia now, where these are really taken over, company town type of privately driven economic development. Difficult. Bad examples from the US in the first half of the 22nd century because of exploiting people. Too much power. You know? But there are different intensities of this corporate spatial responsibilities, but also this might be an interesting function for collaborative workspaces. So you see, there are some things that where we can ground the spatial routing and many things that might be interesting for CVS as well. Okay. What else do we have? I probably skipped this first model and come to the second model, how I think family firms can be approached from a spatial perspective here, and what might be also interesting for governance, for the governance of CVS in particular. So as I told you from the definition already from family businesses, that I see the managing of a firm could be, or probably a collaborative workspace, might be a management challenge. And there's an interesting article that I put out with Jeanette in our book chapter, where we try to compare practices of innovation and incubator managers in technology park versus the ones of collaborative workspace. And you see they care more for the individuals, where the other are more pragmatic of setting contracts up and things like this. Now try to think about, in this realm more or less, how can you use space in order to set up these management practices? And I've come with the management of 3 different spaces. A relative space is an economic entity, and this is the locational issue. So you either concentrate things or you disperse them. You have to find a balance depending on costs, benefit ratio, and so on. You know? So this is the agglomeration economies of this economy's challenge that you have to deal with. And this is the beginning that even if you have a social enterprise entity, you have to be viable over a long run in order to keep things running. One spot. A second spot challenge is the challenge in social space. So you have to deal with those internal, external networks of employees. So I name it this one here, the interaction or proximity economies of this economies thing, you know. So this is another tension that you have to deal with, but it's a different idea of space here. It's a relational, socially constructed. So you try to push these people away in distance or bring them together. Space constituted through the relations per se. It's not there like in the other part. And the third one is the perception. So you play with immersion versus agnosia, which is blindness of all senses. You know, so this is the continence. And also you have 3 different types of space. You might probably, it helps you with how to govern those CVS in space, in rural spaces in particular, with its own specific ideas here. Okay, so this is one of those ideas. Now probably skip these 2. What we are doing at the moment is there will be a special issue in 2 months in the former German Journal of Economic Geography, is now called Advances in Economic Geography, where we put out some of those points that I really mentioned now. There's another special issue in really original research coming up. And I probably come to my second last slide. And these are some thoughts for you now. What will we do with this knowledge here? And how can we transform it to your CVS? And one thing is that, I just skipped in the last one, there is something in family business studies where they talk about familyness. And familyness is a unique bundle of resources that makes the family different than others. So you might think about something like a collaborative workingness. So what is the special thing, the magic that happens within those spaces? How does it make it unique from other spaces? Probably, right? Another thing is that this is something that I put forward in the beginning is family, patchwork family. Is CVS the next step in a more individualized world where everybody's by itself, but don't want to sit alone, even if we're on this long table, everybody sees his world, but it's nicer to sit close by, right? Is this the next step of a life cycle? Think about also this industrial district versus family or the CVS effect. Are they contradicting each other or are they going in the same direction? And this is interesting when you talk about integrating those entities into the local or the entrepreneurial ecosystem or whatever you think about. Is this integration a one-way street, or is it a contradicting through other institutional layers? Or does it has its own logic, right? Bottom-up versus top-down, and all other things that you can put up. You might think about so-called self-reinforcing mechanisms in those CVS. In geography, we talk about agglomeration economies, proximity issues, But from other organizational studies, you know, for example, cascade effect, bandwagon effects. Are there any of those effects in those CVS that you can bring them to the fore, which make them unique than others, and which also make them spatially rooted? So these are some ideas you might come up with. Apart from this, that we have different specialities or also varieties of CVS, as in this periphery. If you look at the newest articles in leading journals, they talk about varieties now of peripheries and things like this. Please.
So let me ask you, like, the spatial rootness is
Yes.
something that can be built
That's a good
based
question.
on these
Yes.
cohesive factors that you mentioned.
Yeah. That's a very good and striking question. I'm now in the planning department. They love stuff like this. Is it possible to design it, to build it, to put it out there? So we leave this analysis element and they go beyond this because they want to design, they want to create. This whole thing, the experience has been made in the 70s with trying to export the third Italy in other places, failed many times. I don't know, but I wouldn't say that it's not, why not give it a try? You know, of course, there are companies that I think our colleague yesterday talked about this, WeWork and so on, they try to multiply the same idea in many locations. And it was often not working, you know, but it could be, if you scale up community-led CVS, you know, this is what we're also debating about in Berlin now, how to have alternative housing project now also able to scale up. That it's not a small refuge here and there, and once the initiators are gone or they get older and they have bring those big stakes in anymore, it's dying out, you know. So how can we implement this model alternatively on a bigger scale, for example? I like this design element. So it's an interesting question about it. Yes, and in other words, you might try to isolate distinctive features of CVS, you know, in order for theory building, and this is probably an interesting part for the project as a whole. If you sum up those 15 PhDs in the end, if you came up, hey, is there something that we did for general theory building here or not? Is there something out there? It does not necessary to be. It can be also, in speaking in the words of Dimitris, an assemblage of interesting ideas, but you never know. This might be also interesting. Here, and probably our last point that might be also interesting is when we talk about this patchwork family CVS evolution, you might also think of different types of companies among friends who are now rising, or so-called employee-owned companies, you know, where your family member, if he doesn't have nobody to succeed, he said, hey, in order to have intrinsically motivated people, I passed my company over to some employees, or all of them, to hold stakes, because they are working complete different interesting motivation, locally rootedness, and so on. Okay, and to finalize today, there was a picture yesterday of this guy, you see, Sunday, Paralia Asteria in front of the St. Nicholas Church. Unknown painter, but hopefully I now have an idea. So I learned a lot from your presentation and the whole atmosphere about CVS here, and probably you can also get some ideas from me in order that help you from the family business side or economic geography side to extend to your ideas here. Yeah, to those who are interested there are some publications that I can also put it on the website and so on. So that's basically mostly from this start. Now, probably move over to the comments, and then we open the big discussion, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was super interesting, and especially for me, I found it very interesting to look at the German map and see where the SMEs or the family businesses are distributed. And I think that's actually my first question, because we could see, okay, it's in Baden-Württemberg, it's in Bavaria, like already very strong regions basically, and they're a little bit more distributed. And I was wondering if at the same time they're so located basically, and they try to like stay where they are
Yeah.
situated.
Yes.
Doesn't it lead necessarily to like, if we only support them basically through policies, whatever, doesn't it reinforce this spatial inequality basically, which we can see between Eastern Germany and
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good question. And indeed, if you look at the history, especially on Germany, Germany was a state of some very small dukes, church-owned spots. So everybody has its own small land before it was reunited as what we know nowadays, national building. Took forever. Same in the North Italy or Italy as a whole. You know, it was also very small, fine-grained. Switzerland was a little different. Nevertheless, there was a high independence of locals back in the days. That might explain one thing. The fact that these companies are promoted through policies is basically not the fact, because they are all independent at all. So they won't cry, we not need this or that. They're the last one, they want to take any measures because then they are not independent anymore. So there is this strong, rooted tradition of being completely independent on the one hand, but being his own boss in order to get things done. This is probably because of this history, relatively, that this is strongly rooted. The whole thing was also partly true in Saxony for a long time, until the socialist times. In the Erzgebirge area, it was very strong as well. But through almost 45 years of a different system, it was erased partially. At the same time, they have problems. So it's not a thing for eternity. After the third generation, only I think every third family firm survives. So this is really a red line. And another problem is that you have family business, but you have also business families. And those business families, the youngest ones, they won't stay in those small places. They live in London, Sydney, New York, wherever. And now how do you manage this thing if you find somebody from your company? So there are new models necessary, and probably co-working, collaborative, whatever type of things might help here, or at least experience made there in order to keep those things running. Right? So that's the, but there's definitely a spatially persistence in there as well, which might flip to a lock-in if managed not in a right way. Yes.
And then you briefly mentioned also like this corporate spatial responsibility and strong place leadership basically. And you linked it to like the revitalization of towns. And I saw also in your paper about this, that there you have linked it more into urban areas, and they try to go to business improvement districts or town hall management, whatever.
Exactly.
And there, like especially from the America examples or like the focus on urban areas, I think we also know that it has been discussed under privatization of public space or a very strong public-private partnership, which can basically has the potential threat of like giving too much power, as you already said, to these private entities. And I was wondering if how this can be kind of coordinated in a way that it still has a brings some positive effects for regions, but still it doesn't give the family firms too much power in order to steer how regions are.
There's a thin line. If you look at classical economists like Milton Friedman and others, they said the only social responsibility of companies is to make profit, right? So this is a very strong position in a different way, and through this CSR or SPR, corporate special responsibilities, there's a thin line if this is not a greenwashing or advertising what they do there. But they are really genuine leaders among those firms, within those firms, that really set up place leadership, also interesting concept. You might want to look if you deal with CBS, place leadership. It's growing literature. How to really to manage locals and can come to a hegemony or power. There's an interesting peripheral town in Germany called Duderstadt. There's an entrepreneur called Otto Bock, and he basically set up the whole master plan for the city. Because he said we have to make locational factors for rural areas work, otherwise people will leave. So, and since the city administration was not capable for this, he made it by himself, the question. And it was later even adopted by the city administration. That's the crazy part about it. But of course, there are different other examples from company towns in the US, Australia, mining towns, and so on, where this was brought to an effect where basically there was a privately led domination of the region there. You know? So it substituted the government basically. I don't know how to, it really depends on the environment and the contextual features and so on, in order there's not a blueprint for it. And there's probably also trying to see. What probably might be interesting is that you need a public-private people's partnership for peace in order to have everyone in it. And this is probably also an idea for to integrate with civil society in such an institutional arrangement. This will be the future there. Yes, thank you.
A quick question, like, so obviously you presented your empirical framework where you talk about your social space, economic space, and cognitive space, but have you gone deeper into how those factors are impacted based on the size of the family business? And it comes to a question of like the governance of the,
yes.
of the actual...
That's a very good question. And if you look at the evolution of the business organization or entity by itself, you start up with a small one-person spot where you do everything by yourself. And then you try to make a divisional matrix, whatever, where management, ownership might even apply, or you employ people where in tasks where you have no idea of, admin, IT, whatever, right? So that's an interesting question. I didn't get that far. I tried to put it more on a conceptual basis, and I know that this in real life, of course, all of those different types of spaces, they interrelate with each other. And this interrelation might be an interesting thing. But in order to have a conceptual measure, to have an economic sphere, a social and a cultural sphere, I set up those tools. Definitely, with the size, different arrangement will change. The locational decision process will be systemized, will not be the next door, whatever spot that you are familiar with, because a friend of mine had a friend that said, hey, there's a spot that you can set up small. Even in a CVS. This might be the new incubator, or I don't know, right? Different items. So this definitely plays a role, same as the sector, as the maturity, of course the personal traits of the entrepreneur, probably also the gender, and so on. Okay. Yes. So, please. Please. There was some, I think.
Yeah, it's more of a curiosity. I'm very curious whether you or in your multidisciplinary group, because we're talking about institution of family,
yes,
forever, but it's an institution that is evolving, that has been traditionally the one assuring certain things, and that it makes sense that, but families are evolving, the dynamics of the families are changing, they are not the only, so before you would say, yeah, the families are
yes,
and I'm not doubting anything you said, but the group of people that met, the friends who are from the locality, the co-ops that are attached to the locality. So I wonder if there is any line of study of change that it evolves with the sociological change.
Yes, there is one. There is one about what I already mentioned, business families. There's not too much going. There's not too many studies, but I mean, no, I'm not a family business coach, so the institution family for me is a side dish that I use for my specialist things. But there is one, and they told me about the business families, because I told you, one daughter is in Sydney. There's one guy in Germany, one daughter is in Sydney, the other is in London, and he wants that one of them takes over. How can she? Because what they often do is that those people who then run the next generation of family work elsewhere in order not to be the boss right from the beginning, in order to understand how it is to be the one that, so they learn different processes at different firms, but they are basically not the top, and then they return. But it's always not easy, and when they stay in those towns, there are also arrangement institutions how this family firms goes back and forth. If you look also at the evolution of young people in general, there are also in Berlin, for example, a movement where there are companies among friends. And what you used to see is that 5-10 years probably it works out quite well. Then one of the founders, he or she, got a family, different priorities, get out of the company, needs somebody to replace her and her. So definitely, and there is, and this was also one of my main arguments here, that I think that CVS might be a real substitution for the institution of, could be, institution of the family as a patchwork family type of people that go together, at least for a temporary time period. And this is what you might think about, which might be an interesting thought. And this could become really then like a mass, there are obviously various varieties of CVS, as we all know. But this might be, if you take this bottom-up, community-led, embedded type of CVS, you might come up with family type of driven things. Might be interesting. But it's a very good thought that you come up with. This is probably a new idea of putting things together.
More, I feel like maybe families, especially when you go to certain levels, are less rooted, like because the kid lives in Paris, the other lives in whatever.
Yes.
And the attachment of
Exactly.
Town, it's
Yes.
gone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are first case studies that especially deal with that stuff. And sometimes it really happens also that those family firms are moved the headquarters to bigger towns, or what I've also had from case studies is that, for example, in the second generation, the son opened up a branch in Tokyo of a family firm because he had a Japanese wife and he lived there for a long time. Next generation, basically nobody dealt with Japan but him, so he closed the next year closed it down again. So they are going back and forth. And this setting up this or staying with the local rootness is also a different thing now. Imagine virtual worlds. What does it tell us about it? Is this necessary? There's a new discussion about the end of geography again during COVID pandemic times that we had one in the late 90s. Yeah, about the virtual organization. Yeah, there's the being there idea is substituted through being aware. If you take the socially ideas behind it, it's about attention, about having you here, no matter where you are, right? Is this the new thing that substitutes the being there or not? Nobody knows, but if people look at the quarter, at the workspace through metaverse or virtual things, it's a new perception that our generation is partly involved in, but the new is fully immersed in. I don't know. Things that we have to look upon it. Yes.
I have some.
Yeah. There's something?
No? So if I may, I have more like,
Yes.
like just wanted to comment about the notes I was taking. I think that might be my takeaways, like for me, and I think it could be useful for the students, more than questions. But I really thank you for the presentation. It was really enlightening, not only because I didn't know much about family business, but also, to understand how you did it, how you framed your kind of contribution, how you found a spot where you could theorize and kind of develop that new field, let's say. Because actually what I see is I think it's also very like it has a great potential from theoretical point of view. It's like to cross two fields. Like there was the family business literature on one side, economic geography on the other. It was like, as you said, like kind of disconnected, and bam, like that the contribution is to link both. And I think it's, for me, it's like a very important takeaway. Like it has a lot of potential when you really crosses two disciplines, and mainly, and some of you are in management studies and or geographical, and then you take from one and you put in the other, and then bam, there is something new that you can build a kind of big contribution just by mixing two things. So I think that is very important, even though you might not be in family business, but just thinking about crossing two concepts over. But that's the first thing.
Yeah, there's one.
Electricity.
Okay.
I have like some of that, I'll try to do it very quick. Another, for me, important takeaway is that the notion of space, for instance, or co-working that you talk about, workingness, like I think also has a lot of potential to extract some novelty out of it, is to understand the terms in different ways. Like when you think about co-working, you can see it as an activity, as an interaction, you can play with words like workingness, things like that. Think that co-working is a noun or a verb. It takes completely different sense if it's an activity than if it's a way of working in. And also space, because you presented, right? Space as like relational, more emotional, more location. And that is also like, I think many of us, we are trapped in physical space. Oh, co-working space, what are my empirical setting? Oh, let's see co-working spaces as physical. Okay, why? Maybe you can analyze a community that is not like spread out like in the villages you mentioned, and that's a co-working space too, but maybe more cognitive space. So I think also that is a very interesting takeaway. Another, I think I have another one. Also. Another thing also that you extract a lot of value from is the different scales. Like what is happening in the more local, the more global, doing like that. I think that also brings a lot of possibilities when you are changing the scales, like looking the family run, like more the family level, more at the impact at the local level. Also where the global pipelines are more at the global. So all this gives a lot of room to play, to research, to come with contribution. I think that's a very important takeaway too. And finally, also more empirical point of view, also what you mentioned about like the 30-30. Nobody was paying attention to that because maybe they didn't have, when you changed your way of your perspective, your glasses, then you see reality different. So maybe the 30-30 was not valuable before when you were talking about industrial clusters or urban development, etc. But when you change your glasses and you take these family business glasses in economic geography, then you see the reality different, and maybe you see empirical things that were not that important now. Suddenly they are super interesting. So for me, these were my personal takeaways. I think are very
Thank you.
Great. So thank you very much, Lech.
Thank you. Zoltje had some comment.
Yeah, I'm still thinking, but I also want to elaborate what I think is very important for the group. I think what really is very helpful is the different, like how you develop a scheme, a perspective, how you look into a particular field, right? And I think this could be helpful for us as well to think about what is the perspective, as Ignacy said, what is the perspective that we take on our particular field. And that was one point. And another point is that I wanted to add something to your list here.
Yes.
And that is, what does it mean to be a family? What makes the family business unique? And I think there's maybe a particular regulatory system or institution, set of institutions, right? And that defines who's in and who's out. And that way the family, either direct or you married into it, however, it's the family that is the boundary. In comparison, what is the boundary to collaborative workspaces? who's in, who's out, and this might invite to a critical perspective as well, to ask who can participate, especially if you think about in terms of community of practice, for instance, or a collaborative club, or however you want to put it. Who's in, who's out, and by what means. And I think this could invite, especially to critical perspective, to ask those questions as well.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. I think that's so. Okay.
If I can just add on, because I was thinking something similar to Sunte's point,
Mm-hmm.
is, and you mentioned it, this monopolistic or, attitude of a too big, family business, and the impact on, the barriers to new entrants, like if I'm a business entrepreneur and I want to enter a specific territory, I may not be welcome there because there's, this well-established monopoly over it.
Yes. As we all know, there's always a dark side to it in every subject that we do. Yeah. Also with family business and so on, right? Absolutely. Lock-ins, persistence, and exerting power in ways beyond own borders. Okay. I think that, yes.
Maybe from the point of view of planning and architecture.
Yes.
Philosophical point of view, let's say, the difference between the place and space and how we use it, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were talking, I was thinking, and I also was thinking about it many times, and I also read about it. So this family, this space is given by the family. I mean, just correct me if I'm right or wrong. This space is given by the family or the family business, the business itself, or the owner of the property or whatever.
Yeah.
And the place is something that can be created by the users of that business.
For example.
And so maybe the place is the space that has a meaning to it, right?
Yes, I mean, I sent you a paper about concepts of space in economic geography and regional economics that I recently published, where I differentiate between space as a location, as a place, as a landscape, with various meanings and completely different theories how to set up those things. This might help, but that's definitely the point. And one is, from the architectural point of view, is of course the built environment. Does it stand as a physical entity, or is it loaded with emotions, with attachments, with appropriatements, and so on and so forth? Somebody who has entered the room for the first time, okay, wow, it's interesting. After you've heard the story of the whole thing, you make completely different associations with the space where you and so on. Yeah. But I sent you, we connect with this. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Great, fantastic.
Thank you, Ignacy. Thank you both for the comments.